Don't stop.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Everything and Anything and a Bit Gay podcast. I am Zach Randalls-Friedman, and today I'm bringing you a special episode about Pride Month. Happy Pride. It's every June is Pride Month. In today's episode, it's so important. It is more important than ever. There are so many fun things to do during Pride Month, and I have been to the New York City Pride Parade many, many times, and God, it's so much fun. Like, we would go and stand in the same spot every year with the same group of friends, and it was incredibly fun. And it was not super hot because it was June. I mean, it wasn't like the July, August, September heat that you can get in New York, but the weather was usually sunny and perfect. And just like there was tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people just there celebrating all the different floats and stuff that went by and all the hot guys and stuff and the dykes on bikes and just like, oh God, I love New York City Pride. I haven't been in years. I went to Boston Pride last year, which was okay. It's a smaller scale, but there's, tons of, everybody's feeling really prideful, I'll say, and just really happy to be there. And it's just kind of fun to be around just all these people that are not necessarily gay or lesbian or transgender or part of the LGBTQ plus community, but it's people with their families or their parents are coming out with them and stuff. And it's people just that are allies coming out to celebrate Pride. So there are lots of fun things that happen with Pride. There's also some things that aren't as fun. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But let's talk about why Pride actually exists and why it still matters. Why does the LGBTQ plus community still need their own special month? And if you are part of the LGBTQ plus community, hopefully you know the answer to this. But if you don't know or you're not part of that community, we're going to talk about it. Because what we're seeing now in 2026 is that there are a lot of kind of corporate things that are going away. A lot of these big corporations were all posting Pride messages, Happy Pride. They were sponsoring Pride parades, and all that seems to be disappearing. I do another podcast called Listen Up Girl podcast where I do news pretty much 7 days a week, and it's 10 minutes or less. So if you haven't subscribed, go to that and look it up, Listen Up Girl. And a lot of my stories are about how a lot of these people that were partners to these Pride events are pulling out. There's Pride events that are not going to happen this year because they have lost their corporate funding. And the funding is just quietly kind of drying up. There's almost like a sense of counter Pride that's happening. You don't see as many companies posting Happy Pride Month, or we have an LGBTQ plus employee engagement group, where all the LGBTQ plus people will come in and do things together. People aren't promoting that as much. People are moving away from DEI altogether because of the current climate in the United States today. And it's really kind of sad, but let's talk about that. There's going to be a lot of kind of real talk in this episode, a little bit of reflection, some joy, because Pride is about celebration, but we need to kind of talk about all that. So let's start with the biggest misconception that's happening right now. Pride is not just a party. It's June, summer's kicking off, everybody's feeling really happy. So you got people putting their rainbow clothing on or putting on a rainbow tank top or whatever and going to parades or different Pride events. And those are all the things that I kind of really love. I don't wear rainbow clothing myself, but I would maybe now, who knows? But Pride did not start as a party. Let's just be clear about that. Pride started because people in the LGBTQ plus community were pushed to the edge. If you think about the Stonewall riots, which was in 1969, I believe, think about what those people had to go through in order to get the rights that we have today. That's where it all kind of started. Those protests that they had were not super organized the way that they were today. They 100% were not sponsored. I mean, they were fighting against the police. There were no corporate floats back then. Is people protesting outside of a bar at a park. There was a lot of resistance. There was a lot of anger. There was a lot of people getting physically hurt. A lot of people were just saying, we've had enough of this. And it was led by people like Marsha P. Johnson was one of the people who was in New York City at the time. And Sylvia Rivera was another person who led these efforts. This community is still very marginalized. And even when the community itself is marginalized, we had people like Marsha and Sylvia that were going and leading these fights. And that's really how Pride started. It wasn't polished. It wasn't a marketing campaign. It wasn't any of that. It wasn't comfy. It wasn't where you have a step and repeat where you can go take a picture. There were no fancy floats. There was no hot boys in Speedos or dykes on bikes coming down, Fifth Avenue and stuff like it. None of that was what was happening. It was something that was way more raw back then. And we've made a lot of progress in the LGBTQ plus community. But let's talk about why Pride still matters, because there's a narrative almost floating around that, you've arrived. Why do you need your own month? LGBTQ people have equality now, and Pride is just a thing that you want to do just to have a party and have a big parade. But let's kind of go a little deeper for a second, because that is not true. We're watching a lot of things happen. We're watching the U.S. government come up with 650 plus bills this year that they're trying to get passed that are anti-LGBTQ plus. It's an enormous waste of money. They are mostly targeting transgender people, which is less than 1% of the population. Less than 1%. You're spending millions and millions of dollars, wasting millions and millions of people's time, hours of their life, focusing on this for no reason. It's because you're scared that a person wants to live their authentic life. Trans people are being targeted in such alarming ways. Books are being banned across the country. Conversations that we were having 3 years ago are now just being completely shut down. And people are saying, why do you need Pride? And I always think that question that you just asked, here's the answer. Because Pride is about visibility, and we are losing that. It's about community. It's about protection. It's about one of the only times each year when LGBTQ people will show up in numbers and say that we are here, that we exist, and we are not going anywhere. I mean, it is starting to have to happen more and more, because we have to protest things that are happening more frequently than they have in the past decade. And we'll be right back. Okay, now back to the show. The No Kings rallies and stuff. You have a lot of people that are part of the LGBTQ plus community showing up with those things and protesting, because it's the orange convicted felons recommendations to get rid of rights for transgender people and LGBTQ plus people. So let's talk about something that honestly makes me pause every time I kind of talk about this or I see it. There's been a rise in what I'll call counter Pride events. So you have probably seen them or read them in the news, but you have a lot of people doing this straight Pride messaging, as if a white, straight, evangelical Christian man needs to have his own campaign. Or you have the traditional family campaigns. And traditional family in Tennessee, they're making June instead of Pride, they're calling it Nuclear Family Month. And what a nuclear family is let me just be clear, to them is a man, a woman, and their children. So if you're a single mother or a single father with children, you don't count. If you're a same-sex couple, you definitely don't count. So you're limiting it down to what they want is a man and a woman and children. So I don't know if you're a man and a woman married, if you're even part of the nuclear family. But that is what Tennessee is passing to have. Instead of Pride Month, they're calling it Nuclear Family Month. And bars, you hear these bars. I think last year there was one in Colorado where they were hosting straight nights during Pride Month. Because there's been messages out there about, why did the LGBTQ plus people get their own month? Why can't we have straight month? Because straight people didn't have to go through the stuff that we went through. They didn't have to have things like the Stonewall riots. And you didn't have to like fight for your rights. You didn't have to fight to be able to marry someone that you love. So straight people don't need pride. Not because they shouldn't feel proud of their lives and their relationship with their families, but they just don't need it. They were already able to live their full authentic selves already without needing to go and start a movement or a protest or a rally. They didn't have to fight to hold hands in public, get married, or feel just kind of safe being who they are. So when these counter events do pop up, it doesn't make it feel like a celebration. It makes me want to react to them like, what the fuck are you doing? You're having a straights only celebration night in your bar. Why do you need that? Like, come up with a better marketing promotion. And I remember last year reading about that, or even reporting on it on my news podcast, where they tried to do this in this bar in Colorado, and it failed miserably. Like, a lot of people didn't show up. They had very low attendance. So come up with a better marketing thing. So pride isn't about exclusion. It's about inclusion. It's about creating a space that wasn't always there. And when people are trying to create a straight version of that, it kind of proves why pride still exists in the first place. So let's go and talk about the corporate pride, because I've worked at a lot of big companies where pride is a big focus, not just in June, but throughout. I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for a lot of my career, and there's been certain companies that do an amazing, amazing job at DEI. And I am seeing less of that, not necessarily from those companies that I worked at, but overall, if I worked in the digital communications world. So I was writing a lot of those messages and doing the creative for a lot of these messages for social media in the past. And, if you go to LinkedIn now, you're seeing less of those things coming up. You're noticing the shrinking of the corporate budgets that are supporting pride events, or just like going away altogether. There was a long time where companies were all in with rainbow logos, so like changing their corporate logo to a rainbow color. They had pride campaigns. They were sponsoring things. They had floats and parades. And we all joked about it, rainbow capitalism. But here's one thing, that money mattered. It funded LGBTQ youth programs, community centers across our communities, mental health services, HIV and AIDS resources. And now a lot of those companies have completely pulled back. There's no budget. The budget completely disappeared. Because supporting LGBTQ people has become a controversial thing again in this world. Companies are afraid of the backlash. They're afraid of losing customers. They're afraid of being seen as too political, because support of Pride Month is political. And so instead of standing firm, they're kind of quietly stepping away. I keep reading all these stories about this Pride event in Wisconsin is not going to take place, or this Pride event in this part of Florida is not taking place because they lost all their corporate sponsors. So let's talk about what happens when that funding disappears. Because here's the part people don't always connect with. When corporate funding disappears, it doesn't hurt the corporations at all. It hurts the communities. People's programs, they all shut down. Spaces close, resources disappear. And a lot of people, especially LGBTQ youth, those spaces are lifelines. Those community centers that they go to, the events that they attend, those are lifelines, because those are sometimes the only places they can go to be themselves, because maybe their family doesn't accept them, or they don't have their original friend group doesn't accept them. So they can go to these places where they can be themselves, they can feel safe, they can learn about the LGBTQ plus community, they can find support. But when that funding disappears, all that safety disappears too. And that is a huge impact. If you think about like some of these big corporations that took all this Pride merchandise out, and I'll just shout out to Target for doing that, because they were one of the ones that were pressured by people to take, they had a whole section of Pride clothing and just, Pride coffee cups and t-shirts and flags and all this stuff in Target. And it just took a few of those people that are threatened by somebody who's gay or part of the LGBTQ plus community. They were threatened by it, and they protested, and they would go into Target and do videos and post them online showing about, look at this gay shit they would talk about. I mean, it's just like these homophobic guys. And the guys, I'm just saying, the ones that are the most homophobic are always the ones that always are a little more gay than everybody else because they're just hiding it because they're so frustrated they can't be themselves. But yeah, the Target was one of the first ones that made national news where they were pulling out all the Pride merchandise, just getting rid of it all. Or they had like maybe 2 racks left of it. And then you show these, guys going in and throwing it all on the floor, throwing their clothes on the floor. Ooh, they were so tough. It's ridiculous. So, all this doom and gloom is important to kind of point out, but Pride is also one of the most joyful things that I've ever experienced. Again, being in New York City and being around hundreds of thousands of people in the LGBTQ plus community or that are allies and unapologetically being themselves. I mean, you had people that wanted to wear a wig and makeup and experiment with it that I would see that did it. And they were being able to be themselves for that day. And they were 100% accepted. Nobody was making comments or making fun of them or making bad remarks. They were just themselves. You had every identity there, every expression, every version of what it meant to be a human was at that parade. And nobody was shrinking that day. Nobody was hiding. And that feeling was so powerful and healing for so many people. And it was just so much fun. I just remember leaving Pride because you start off at the parade. I don't know, maybe it's around noon or something. And you watch the parade, then you go to a bar and you have a few drinks, and then you go back and watch the parade, and then you're going out afterwards, and maybe you're going to dinner, then you're going to another bar at the end of the night, and you're just spending time with the different groups of people throughout the city. It was iconic. It was just so much fun. There's just nothing like it. There is an energy in New York City already, but whenever you throw Pride in there, it just makes it so electric. There was rooftop parties everywhere. There's even more because rooftops have become more of a thing. And it just, I don't know, I've just never experienced anything like New York City Pride. I've been to Pride in other cities, and the Pride in New York City, it's just amazing. I remember one time it was we started off I think the parade's usually on Sunday. I think we started off Wednesday kind of celebrating, and then Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday. And then by the time I was kind of over LGBTQ plus people, I'm I've had too much. I've overstimulated myself with Pride. And I'm okay, let's just go to the parade and go home. But that happens because that happens to everybody where you're oh my God, I have gayitis. I can't do this anymore. Too many gay people. But mostly I always have had an amazing time. And there's been, just some crazy nights where I'm I need to take the next day off because I was out way too late. And even if I wasn't hungover, I was well, just dancing and walking from one bar to the other and being outside in the sun all day and just being over socialized and overstimulated. It was just, but there was those mornings where I'm never drinking again morning. So yeah, that did happen. I'm not saying that it didn't, but Pride was the time to do it. And I just have the best memories of New York City Pride. So here's the question. Where does Pride go from here? Where do we go with Pride Month? If corporate support keeps shrinking, if funding continues to kind of disappear and they're not funding these community centers or events or funding LGBTQ youth programs, if counter movements like these straight nights keep getting louder, or we need more, or they start doing more nuclear family months like Tennessee is doing, then Pride has to evolve. It has to become more community driven again. It has to be more intentional. We have to become more grounded in what is meant to be and what it's meant to be. And honestly, maybe that's not a bad thing because Pride was never supposed to be perfect. It was supposed to be real. It's not always about that fun parade or that fun party or seeing all your friends. Sometimes it's about just being yourself, meeting other people in the community you normally wouldn't meet. There's a lot of people that, want to see their favorite drag queen, and they get to see their favorite drag queen that was either from RuPaul's Drag Race or their local neighborhood bar. They'll get to see them at these parades and stuff, and it's so fun. Or they'll see celebrities on floats in New York City, that are part of the LGBTQ plus community, and all that's fun stuff. But we need to just get back to not letting Pride Month go away. We need to say that Pride is not just a party. It's not just a parade. It's not just another event. It's not another rooftop party. And it's something that we need to go and do and make sure that we're celebrating Pride, because there's a lot of counter versions of Pride that's out there now. And we need a response to that, because we need to respond to that because of our history, of the injustice that's happened. And if you feel like that you don't belong or you didn't belong at some point and you don't want that to diminish and you want to feel like you belong in this community, Pride Month is there, and that's why it still matters. So let's not forget that Pride is about joy, about protest, visibility, community. And whether you're celebrating at something massive like a New York City Pride Parade, or you're celebrating something a little smaller like the Boston Pride Parade, or even something even smaller like the Louisville, Kentucky Pride Parade, just know that you are living your truth in your everyday life. And that is what Pride is to me, where you have the opportunity to be who you really are and to be your authentic self. So that is my message. So I hope you have an amazing Pride. And when you're out there at a parade or you're at an event or you see a post online, just think about how important Pride is, because it took a lot for people before us and for all of us to go and fight and protest and to get the LGBTQ plus community where they are. So let's not lose that. If you think this podcast should be shared with somebody that you know, please do, because we need more and more people to realize how important Pride is. We need more and more people to stop these counter Pride events. We don't need a straight night at a bar. Anyway, thanks so much for listening to my podcast. Please make sure to share this podcast. Also, please leave a review of my podcast on your favorite podcast platform. The more reviews I get, the more people get to hear this podcast. And I will be back tomorrow with another awesome episode of the Everything and Anything in a Big Gay podcast. Thanks for listening.